Our story begins in Vienna in the 1930s. For psychotherapy, this city was what Silicon Valley would become for technology, the epicenter of a revolution. And at this epicenter, a new star was rising, the young and brilliant Dr. Viktor Frankl. He was already heading the neurology department at the Rothschild Hospital, in a ward known as the Suicide Pavilion, where he had successfully saved thousands of women from despair. In a world dominated by the giants Sigmund Freud and Alfred Adler, Frankl had his own third, audacious idea. Freud argued that humans are driven by a will to pleasure. Adler believed it was a will to power. Frankl, however, proposed a will to meaning. He believed that a person's primary need is not to satisfy instincts or dominate, but to find and fulfill the meaning of their life. For Freud, a person was a being seeking pleasure. For Adler, a competitor striving for the top. But for Frankl, a person was the captain of a ship in a storm. They desperately need a map and a destination, that is, meaning. Soon, this theory would face the most terrible test. On the eve of the war, Frankl received an American visa. It was a golden ticket to safety. He was ready to leave, but he looked at his elderly parents, who were doomed to stay behind. At that moment, his gaze fell upon a table. There lay a piece of marble his father had brought from the ruins of the great synagogue of Vienna, which had been burned by the Nazis during Kristallnacht. Engraved on the stone was a part of the commandment, "Honor thy father and thy mother." Frankl stayed. This choice, of duty to his family, of meaning over his own survival, became the first practical step in his future philosophy. Soon, this step led him into the very heart of darkness, Auschwitz. There, everything was taken from him, his clothes, his hair, even his name, which was replaced with the number 119-4. But the most agonizing loss was his manuscript. His book, The Doctor and the Soul, was his life's work, his intellectual child, which he had secretly sewn into the lining of his coat. He would later describe this loss as if he had watched his own child being murdered before his eyes. In that moment, Frankl was physically stripped of everything that constituted his identity. It was here, at the bottom of hell, that his theory was tested by fire. Working in the camp barracks, Frankl, the doctor, noticed a terrifying pattern. Survival was more common not among those who were physically strongest, but among those who had a purpose to live for. Those who lost hope, for instance, believing the war would end by Christmas, only for it not to, faded quickly. The death rate in the camp spiked sharply right after Christmas. This was living proof of his theory, a confirmation of Nietzsche's words, which Frankl often quoted: "He who has a why to live for can bear almost any how." He had witnessed a tragic experiment that showed a person's immune system is directly linked to their will to live. He saw specific examples. One prisoner held on to the thought of reuniting with a beloved child. Another held on to the dream of completing his scientific work. Frankl himself survived by imagining his wife Tilly. He held internal dialogues with her, drawing incredible strength from this love. During a miles-long march through the frozen Bavarian countryside while being beaten by guards, he would talk to her in his mind. The image of her smile was so real that the physical pain receded. He wasn't just remembering her, he had made love his mental sanctuary. He also imagined himself giving lectures to students after the war about the psychology of the concentration camp. In this way, he transformed his suffering into an object of study, thereby giving it meaning. It was then that he had his most profound insight. Everything can be taken from a man but one thing, the last of the human freedoms, to choose one, an attitude in any given set of circumstances. Even when he was externally a slave, he remained internally free in his choice, to succumb to despair or to maintain his human dignity. He saw people who shared their last piece of bread. It was in this tiny gap between stimulus and response, between a guard's blow and the decision to break or not, that he saw the essence of the human spirit. In ordinary life, this is the pause before an angry reply to an email. In Auschwitz, that pause existed between a blow and an inner choice. And according to Frankl, it is precisely in that space that our greatest power lies. From this choice, Frankl's central idea was born. Suffering ceases to be suffering at the moment it finds a meaning. His personal mission became to survive in order to tell the world what he had witnessed. His pain became the raw material for a universal teaching on resilience. He acted like a sculptor. He did not try to destroy the ugly stone of his suffering. That was impossible. Instead, he took it as raw material and carved from it something meaningful and valuable for all of humanity. The suffering did not disappear, but it was transformed. This also gave rise to specific techniques, such as the one Frankl called paradoxical intention. This is a method of confronting one's fear head-on. If a prisoner was terrified of typhus, Frankl would advise him not to hide from the thought, but, on the contrary, to imagine it in the worst possible detail. This often reduced anxiety and restored a sense of control. Today, a logotherapist might advise someone who fears public speaking and trembling hands, go on stage and try to shake as hard as you can. Show everyone what a champion shaker you are. The humor and absurdity of the task break the vicious cycle of fear. Frankl discovered this principle decades before it was popularized in other forms of therapy. Thus, he formulated the concept of tragic optimism. This is not a blind faith that everything will be okay. It is the courage to say yes to life in spite of the inevitable pain, guilt, and death. It is the complete opposite of modern, toxic positivity. Tragic optimism does not demand good vibes only. It acknowledges that life includes this tragic triad but maintains the belief that meaning can be found even under these conditions. It is like a deeply rooted tree that bends in a storm, not a kite carried away by the first gust of wind. Sometimes this philosophy took the most unexpected forms. Frankl and a fellow prisoner made a pact to come up with at least one amusing story each day about what might happen to them after liberation. The ability to look at the absurdity of their situation with humor, even gallows humor, helped them to rise above their circumstances for a few moments. They imagined attending a dinner party after the war and, out of old camp habit, asking the hostess to ladle from the bottom where the soup was thickest. This dark humor was not just a joke. It was a powerful psychological tool that allowed them to preserve their identity and mentally transport themselves from an unbearable present to a safe future. But then liberation came, and it did not bring immediate joy. Frankl described this state as complete depersonalization. After years of inhuman stress, the psyche simply shut down. He and other survivors looked at freedom and could not believe it, could not feel anything. Joy was something they had to learn to experience all over again. Their emotions were like a leg that has fallen asleep. Circulation, that is, freedom, is restored, but feeling returns not immediately, but slowly and painfully, with a tingling sensation. Frankl recalled walking through a flowering meadow outside the camp gates and feeling absolutely nothing. Returning to Vienna, he learned the truth, and it was more devastating than anything he had endured. His entire family had perished. His young pregnant wife Tilly had died of typhus in Bergen-Belsen. His mother was murdered in the gas chamber at Auschwitz. His brother also died in Auschwitz. And his father, the one who had brought the piece of marble from the synagogue, had died of exhaustion in Theresienstadt. The hope of reuniting with his loved ones, which had warmed him on the frozen marches, turned into the most terrible pain. He was utterly alone. And here the central question of his philosophy resonated with deafening force. How can one speak of meaning after this? It was in this state of profound grief that he dictated a book, the one that would become known as Man's Search for Meaning. He did it in just 9 days, almost in a feverish state. This was not a calculated academic work. It was a cry, a testimony, a desperate attempt to turn his pain into something useful for others. He even wanted to publish it anonymously, unwilling to build a reputation on his tragedy. This book was not written, it erupted from him like lava. It was an emergency form of psychotherapy for himself. The book, originally titled Saying Yes to Life in Spite of Everything, was not initially successful, but gradually it resonated with millions, especially in America, where the post-war generation was searching for new foundations. The story of a psychiatrist who found meaning in hell became a universal message. To date, more than 16 million copies have been sold. In 1991, the Library of Congress named it one of the 10 most influential books in the United States. It was not an instant bestseller, but a sleeping giant whose importance only grew with time. So, what was this philosophy that found such a response? At its core lies an idea Frankl called the Copernican revolution in psychology. He argued that we fundamentally ask the wrong question. We constantly ask life, "What is your meaning?" Instead, we must do the opposite. Listen for the question that life asks of us, and we answer it not with words, but with our actions, with our entire lives. Life is not a multiple-choice test, but an essay that each person writes for themselves. And the meaning of this essay is unique for each person at each specific moment. It cannot be found in a book or received from a guru. It can only be discovered in one's own reality. Frankl identified 3 primary paths to this discovery. The first and most obvious is creation, what we give to the world. This could be a work of art or a scientific paper, but more often, it is something much more grounded. A well-built house, a doctor's care for a patient, raising a child. Frankl gave a simple example. An elderly woman, confined to her bed, finds meaning in knitting warm socks for her grandchildren. Her physical world has shrunk to one room, but her contribution to the lives of others fills her existence with purpose. This is the path of active engagement, of leaving one's mark. The second path is experience, what we take from the world. Meaning can be found in the profound appreciation of values, in contemplating the beauty of nature or art, and of course, in loving another person. For Frankl, love was the highest form of meaning. It allows one to see the potential in another, their best version, even if they cannot see it themselves. This path was revealed to him in the camp when, exhausted and frozen, he watched a sunset over the filthy barracks and thought of his wife. At that moment, physical action was impossible, but the experience of love and beauty became a source of strength that could not be taken from him. Finally, there is the third path, the most difficult and most important, which Frankl discovered in hell. When we are faced with unavoidable suffering, a serious illness, an irreplaceable loss, we are left with one final opportunity to find meaning in how we bear that suffering. Our courage, our dignity, our ability to not break in the face of fate become the ultimate expression of meaning. This is the transformation of personal tragedy into a triumph of the human spirit. Frankl spoke of a kind of spiritual alchemy, the ability to turn the lead of suffering into the gold of meaning. It is the absence of these guideposts that gives rise to what Frankl called the primary neurosis of the 20th century, the existential vacuum. This is a feeling of inner emptiness, boredom, apathy, and meaninglessness. In a society where traditional values have crumbled and consumerism offers no answers, people lose their footing. Logotherapy became a direct remedy for this condition. Frankl noted that this vacuum is especially acute on weekends, when the work routine no longer distracts a person from themselves. He called this Sunday neurosis, the tragic state of having the means to live but no meaning to live for. Frankl's ideas extended far beyond his Vienna office. His book became required reading in universities, business schools, and even in NASA's astronaut training programs. The reason is simple. Astronauts face extreme loneliness, constant threat, and situations where fate is out of their hands. The philosophy of tragic optimism and the search for meaning in the unavoidable is a key tool for their psychological survival. In business, companies like Zappos built their culture on the idea of a shared purpose greater than profit, a direct reflection of Frankl's ideas. Today, logotherapy continues to prove its effectiveness in a wide range of situations. It helps veterans with post-traumatic stress disorder, cancer patients find meaning in the final stage of life, and people experiencing professional burnout. Take a specific example: a veteran tormented by the question, "Why did I survive when my comrades didn't?" A logotherapist helps reframe it. Now that you have survived, what responsibility does that place on you? How can you live to honor their memory? This shifts the focus from helpless guilt to meaningful action, transforming the past from a burden into a source of mission. Thus, Viktor Frankl created his philosophy not in spite of hell, but because of it. The concentration camp became his terrible laboratory and his own life, the main experiment. It was a crucible that should have destroyed him. But he did not just survive. He emerged from the fire having forged his suffering into a tool to help millions. His long and fruitful life after the war, he lived to be 92, became a father, and wrote 39 books, was the ultimate proof that his philosophy works. Therefore, his story is not just a tale of survival in the past, it is a guide for navigating the future. It teaches us to ask a different question, not what is the meaning of life, but what meaning does my life demand of me right now? His legacy is not a map with a pre-planned route, it is a compass. It doesn't tell us what meaning is, but it gives us the tool to find it in any situation, in raising children, in a serious illness, or even in a common traffic jam. He hands this compass to each of us for our own unique search.